In this lesson, let's start by talking about what we will be building before we dive into everything. We'll start off by creating our first event, which will represent the creation of a new alarm. Then, we'll create an event handler that will subscribe to that event and will be used to perform additional processing. To keep things simple, we're going to implement both the read and write sides of the system in the same application, so we won't need a message broker to communicate between different services. But don't worry, that is something that we'll cover in an upcoming lesson. Okay, let's get started. First, we'll need to create a new directory called events inside of the domain directory. Inside of this directory, let's create a new file named alarmcreated.event.ts that will contain the event class. As we can see, the event class here is quite simple. It contains a single property called alarm that represents the alarm that was created. This property is marked as read-only to prevent any accidental modifications. Instead of passing the alarm object directly, we could also pass the alarm ID and then fetch the alarm from the database inside of the event handler. However, as we want to eventually introduce the event sourcing pattern in this course, we'll need our events to be fully self-contained. This means that they should contain all the information that is required to reflect the state change that occurred in the system. We distinguish two types of events: domain events and integration events. Domain events are events that are relevant to the domain model. They represent the state changes that occur within the domain. In our case, the alarm created event is a domain event. Integration events are usually a lot thinner than domain events, and they are used for cross-service communication. Okay, so back to our task at hand. To process this event, we'll need to create a new file called alarmcreated.event-handler.ts that will contain the event handler class. But where should we put this file though? Does it belong to the application layer or the domain layer? Well, it depends. Handling the domain events is generally an application concern. The domain layer should only focus on the domain logic, meaning things that a domain expert would understand. Not application infrastructure like handlers and side effect persistence actions using repositories. For instance, when the alarm is created, we might want to publish a domain event to propagate that info to other aggregates or even raise application actions like email notifications. At the same time, some domain event handlers could be considered as part of the domain model, especially if they simply describe the domain-specific policy on how to react to a particular event. However, such event handlers couldn't interact with components from upper layers, such as repositories, services, etc. With all that being said, in our case, we'll put the event handler in the application layer, and that's what you will usually end up doing in your projects as well. Just try to always keep in mind what layer the files you're working on should be placed in. So first, let's create a new directory called event handlers inside of the application directory. Inside this directory, let's create a new file called alarmcreated.event-handler with the following content. The event handler is very similar to the command and query handlers. It needs to be decorated with the events handler decorator and implements the iEventHandler interface. The reason why the events handler annotation is a plural is that we can use it to subscribe to multiple events at once. The handle method here will be called when the event is dispatched, and the original event object will be passed in as an argument to this method as always. Great. Alright, so with this in place, let's head over to our alarms module file and register the event handler in our providers array. Last but not least, we'll need to dispatch the event when the alarm is created. To do that, we'll need to head over to the createAlarm command handler file and import the event bus from the nestjs/cqrs package. With this in place, we can now dispatch the event by calling the this.eventbus.publish method. Please note that this isn't the best way to dispatch events. Domain events should be dispatched from the aggregate root, not from the command handler. We'll cover that in the upcoming lessons. For now, let's save our changes, head over to the terminal, and start the application by running the npm run start dev command. When the application is up and running, we can use the curl command to send a post request to the alarm's endpoint. If we switch to our other terminal window, we should see that our alarm created event handler has been triggered and the event has been successfully processed. Excellent! So we've successfully created our first event and event handler. In the next lesson, we'll continue experimenting with events and we'll see how we can use them to implement the read side of our system.